A common sight in many an ancient battle was one group trying to storm the gates of a city, while another group stood back raining arrows down on their heads. But sometimes the most effective way to take a city wasn't through brute force, but rather psychological warfare. A siege might be broken by terrifying monsters, or a whole army could be wiped out by one clever trick. What are the deadliest strategies ever used in ancient siege warfare? When it comes to besieging cities, there's no better place to start than Greece. The Acropolis of Athens was stormed in 480 BCE by the Persian king Xerxes I, who supposedly employed a massive battering ram to smash down the gates of the city. He is also said to have filled the moat surrounding the city with dirt and built a road over it so his army could get close enough to set fire to the walls. It might seem like a simple strategy, but it was actually a brilliant one because the Acropolis was built to withstand months, if not years of siege. If you can't starve them out, then you have to burn them out. But this brings us to our first problem. How do you put out a fire that's being fanned by high winds? If the Persian army had been faced with a similar situation today, they would have probably pulled out some old-fashioned fire extinguishers. But back then, people didn't even know that carbon dioxide was a thing, let alone use it as a fire suppressant. Instead, they would have to rely on Mother Nature to save the day. A heavy blanket of smoke was produced by burning resin, sulfur, and other volatile substances. The wind was then used to push this smoke into the city, forcing the Athenians to flee for higher ground. This worked perfectly because the Persians weren't trying to conquer the entire city, just the Acropolis. But when all your soldiers are bunched up on top of a hill, it makes them easy targets for archers. So once inside the Acropolis, Xerxes had to employ one of the oldest strategies in the book: keep moving. His army marched south along the coast, pillaging as they went until they reached the Isthmus of Corinth. There they met up with their navy and sailed back to Persia. But in 267 BCE, the Spartans had a slightly more difficult time evacuating their city after it was besieged by the armies of Macedon. Led by King Antipater, the Macedonian army set up camp near the city and began cutting down the trees in the surrounding forest to make it easier to spot any Spartan sorties. They then dug a trench all the way around the city and built a road through the center of it. The Spartans' water supply was cut off, and the only remaining source of water for the citizens and soldiers was the small amount stored in their cisterns. The Spartans tried to hold out, but after 59 days, their water ran out and they surrendered. It seemed like the Macedonians had won a great victory, except there was one tiny problem. The Macedonians hadn't brought any ladders. As soon as the Spartans opened the gates, the victors were slaughtered to a man. There's a lesson to be learned here that many civilizations would ignore in the coming centuries. Don't underestimate your enemy. When news of the sack of Babylon reached the Egyptian pharaoh Shoshenq, he assembled a mighty army and set out to punish the Assyrians for their insolence. Under the command of his vizier, Osorkon, the Egyptians pushed north, defeating the Assyrian king at the Battle of Elthesh and taking him back to Egypt as a prisoner. Once there, Shoshenq paraded the Assyrian king around the streets of Thebes to show everyone what had become of his army. But this victory was short-lived as Thebes was soon sacked by the Assyrians. Oskiskin had to watch from the sidelines as his great army was decimated. So when the Egyptians came back for round two, they had a secret weapon: military elephants. The Egyptians were one of the first civilizations to domesticate war elephants, and they used them to great effect during the reign of Ramses II. War elephants were bred to be smaller than their brethren in the wild, so they could fit in chariots. These tough and intelligent animals were trained to pull carts laden with supplies, attack enemy formations, and trample anyone unlucky enough to be in their path. After seeing what happened to their comrades, the Assyrian king was terrified when he saw the Egyptian elephants coming for him. He knew he was defeated before the first elephant even made it to the gates of Thebes. And that's why he agreed to make peace with Egypt and withdraw from Thebes. No one knows exactly how many elephants Ramses II had, but historians estimate it was somewhere between 20 and 50. That's not a lot compared to other armies, but it doesn't really matter when you have the element of surprise. In 586 BCE, the Babylonians besieged the city of Jerusalem. Led by Nebuchadnezzar II, the Babylonian army invested the city and surrounded it with siege towers, battering rams, and catapults. They launched stones the size of houses at the walls of the city, but they never broke through. The Babylonians were forced to wait another year before the city finally fell. But there was one huge problem. The Bible says that Jeremiah warned the Babylonians not to destroy the city, but they ignored him and leveled Jerusalem to the ground. This isn't the best example of a successful siege strategy, but it does illustrate something about ancient siege warfare. Most ancient armies lacked the heavy equipment needed to breach the walls of a city. Instead, they had to resort to attrition. As long as the defenders had food and water, the city could hold out indefinitely. The invaders would simply have to wait for them to run out. Sometimes it only took weeks, but other times it could take months or even years. But there was a way to speed up the process. Catapults, ballistas, and trebuchets could hurl objects over the city walls, killing or injuring the defenders. The dead would quickly pile up inside the city, creating unsanitary conditions that spread disease. Disease could wipe out half the population in just a few weeks, making the remaining defenders much less effective. But there was one way to make things even worse. Throughout history, there have been cases of invading armies deliberately spreading disease among the citizens of the cities they have besieged. In the Middle Ages, catapults would be used to fling dead bodies over the city walls. And in World War II, the British deployed a bizarre weapon called the germ carrier to infect German forces with anthrax and brucellosis. But in 1346, the Mongols besieged the Crimean city of Kaffa. At the time, there was a bubonic plague epidemic sweeping through Asia and Africa, and the Mongols decided to bring it to Europe. They infected sacks of fleas and flung them over the city walls, then watched gleefully as the disease swept through the city. The Mongols weren't even trying to take the city. They just wanted to punish the citizens for not surrendering. But this led to one of the most deadly sieges in history. Over 60,000 soldiers and civilians died in the siege of Constantinople in 1453. The Ottoman Turks besieged the city and laid siege to it for 53 days. They attacked with cannons, catapults, and infantry, but the Byzantine defenders held out against them. On May 29, 1453, the Ottomans breached the walls and entered the city. They killed or enslaved almost every inhabitant and claimed Constantinople as their own. Mehmed the Conqueror's plan was to rule all of the Byzantine territories, but that meant he had to defeat the last remaining Byzantine forces in the city of Thessaloniki. The Byzantines made the mistake of thinking they could fight the Ottomans head-on. Their cavalry charged across an open field into the waiting arms of the Ottoman infantry. To say that the result was humiliating would be an understatement. With the Byzantine army destroyed, Mehmet could take the rest of the Balkans at his leisure. But this victory came at a cost. The siege of Constantinople was one of the last great victories of the Byzantine Empire, and the siege of Thessalonica was one of the first major victories of the Ottoman Empire. It seems likely that the two sides will meet again on the battlefield sooner or later. But it looks like we'll have to wait a bit longer to find out. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like button for more videos.